Soldier comes home to an empty house, then hears a faint cry in the dark. Hello, and welcome to our channel where we bring to you amazing stories daily. Please like and subscribe to show your support. Staff Sergeant Daniel Mitchell had been away for a long time, 18 months to be exact. His deployment had been tough, physically and mentally. Every day in the war zone felt like a year, but it wasn't just the danger and the constant stress that wore him down. It was the separation from his family that hurt the most. He had missed so much: his daughter Emma's 7th birthday, holidays, family dinners, and the little everyday moments that people often take for granted. As his plane touched down on American soil, Daniel felt a mix of emotions. Relief washed over him, knowing he had made it back alive. But there was also anxiety. He had been away for so long. What if things had changed too much? What if he had changed too much? He clutched the small duffel bag on his lap, the only thing he had brought back with him, aside from memories he wished he could forget. The military base where he landed was filled with activity. Other soldiers reuniting with their loved ones, laughter, and tears of joy. But Daniel was focused on one thing: getting home to his wife, Sarah, and their daughter, Emma. He hadn't told them exactly when he would be arriving because he wanted to surprise them. The thought of seeing their faces when he walked through the door was the only thing that had kept him going during the darkest days of his deployment. He took a cab from the base, trying to calm the nervous flutter in his stomach. The familiar streets of his hometown passed by the window, looking almost unchanged. But everything felt different to Daniel. He felt different. The war had taken a part of him, and he wondered if he could ever get it back. Finally, the cab pulled up to his house. It was a modest home in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and the kids played outside until dark. The porch light was off, but that didn't bother Daniel. It was late, and he figured Sarah and Emma had gone to bed. He paid the driver and stepped out, taking a deep breath of the cool night air. For a moment, he just stood there, looking at the house, trying to absorb the reality that he was home. He had dreamed of this moment for so long, but now that it was here, he felt a strange hesitation. What if they were different? What if he was different? Pushing the thoughts aside, he walked up the driveway, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. The front door was unlocked, which didn't surprise him. They lived in a safe neighborhood, and Sarah often forgot to lock up. He smiled to himself, remembering how he used to tease her about that. He turned the knob quietly, planning to sneak inside and surprise them in the morning. But as soon as he stepped inside, something felt off. The house was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet he had been longing for, but an unsettling silence that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Daniel closed the door behind him and stood in the darkness for a moment, letting his eyes adjust. The familiar scent of the house, a mix of fresh laundry and Sarah's vanilla-scented candles, greeted him. But the air felt different, almost stale, like the house had been holding its breath. He called out softly, "Sarah? Emma?" But there was no answer, just silence. He figured they were asleep, but something didn't sit right with him. He walked through the hallway, his boots making a soft thud on the wooden floor. The living room was the first place he checked. The couch was empty, the throw blanket neatly folded on the armrest. The coffee table was clean, no scattered toys or Emma's coloring books like there usually were. It was too tidy. He moved to the kitchen, hoping to see a note from Sarah, maybe explaining that they had gone to bed early. But the kitchen was empty too. The countertops were spotless, the sink dry. Daniel noticed the calendar on the wall. The date hadn't been marked off in days, and the kitchen clock had stopped ticking. His heart started to pound a little harder in his chest. "Sarah?" he called again, louder this time. But there was still no reply. His mind began to race with possibilities. Maybe they were at a neighbor's house, or maybe Sarah had taken Emma to visit her parents for a few days. But then why hadn't she mentioned it in her last letter? And why was the door unlocked? He moved upstairs, his steps quickening as a growing sense of unease settled over him. He checked Emma's room first. The door was slightly ajar, and he pushed it open with a trembling hand. Her bed was empty, The covers pulled back as if she had just gotten up. Her favorite stuffed animals were still lined up on the pillow, but the room was eerily quiet. He looked around, half expecting to see her hiding in the corner, giggling as she always did when she tried to surprise him. But there was nothing, just the empty bed and the stillness of the room. Panic began to rise in Daniel's chest. He crossed the hallway to the master bedroom, where he and Sarah slept. The bed was made, but the sheets looked untouched. On the nightstand, there was a picture of the three of them taken just before he left for deployment. He picked it up, staring at their smiling faces, trying to hold onto the warmth of that moment. But it only made the coldness of the empty house feel even more overwhelming. Daniel put the picture down and tried to think clearly. Maybe Sarah had left a note somewhere else. Maybe there was an explanation he hadn't found yet. He started searching the house more frantically, opening drawers, checking the bathroom, even looking out the windows to see if their car was in the driveway. But there was nothing. No sign of Sarah, no sign of Emma, no sign of anyone. He stood in the middle of the living room, his mind racing with questions. Where could they be? Why hadn't Sarah told him if they were going somewhere? And why did the house feel so abandoned? Suddenly, a memory flashed in his mind. A conversation he had with Sarah a few weeks before he left. She had been worried about how she would manage everything while he was gone. Emma was young and needed a lot of attention, and Sarah had been feeling the strain. Daniel had reassured her that she was strong, that she could handle it. But what if she hadn't? What if something had happened while he was away? He tried to push the thoughts away, telling himself that there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe they had gone to visit family and lost track of time. Maybe there had been an emergency and she couldn't contact him. But the more he tried to rationalize it, the more the unease gnawed at him. Then, as he stood there, lost in thought, he heard something. It was faint, almost imperceptible at first, but it caught his attention. A soft, muffled sound coming from somewhere below. It was barely a whisper, but it sent a chill down his spine. He listened closely, holding his breath. There it was again, a faint, almost indistinguishable cry. His heart pounded as he followed the sound. It was coming from the basement. Daniel hadn't checked the basement yet. He never had a reason to. Sarah never went down there, and Emma was too scared of the dark to even think about it. The basement was mostly used for storage, filled with old boxes, holiday decorations, and things they didn't need but couldn't bring themselves to throw away. He walked over to the basement door, his hand trembling as he reached for the knob. The door creaked open, revealing the dark staircase leading down. The cry came again, slightly louder this time. It was definitely coming from the basement. Daniel's mind raced with possibilities, but none of them made sense. Why would anyone be down there? And why did it sound like a child? His instincts told him to be cautious, but his concern for his family overruled his fear. He took a deep breath and descended the stairs, one step at a time. The basement was cold and dimly lit, the air heavy with the smell of dust and old wood. The cry came again, more distinct now, and Daniel recognized it. It was Emma's voice. He hurried down the remaining steps, his heart in his throat. As he reached the bottom, he saw a small figure huddled in the corner, partially hidden behind a stack of boxes. It was Emma. She was curled up on a pile of blankets, her face buried in her knees, trembling with fear. Emma! Daniel rushed over to her, dropping to his knees. He gently touched her shoulder, and she flinched, looking up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. The sight of her broke his heart. She looked so small, so fragile, like a little bird that had been left out in the cold too long. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Is it really you?" "It's me, sweetheart. I'm home," Daniel said, trying to keep his voice steady. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. She clung to him, sobbing into his chest. He could feel her tiny body shaking with each sob, and it tore him apart to think of what she must have gone through. "Where's Mommy?" Daniel asked gently, stroking her hair. "Where's Sarah?" Emma sniffled, trying to catch her breath. Mommy. Mommy went away. Daniel's heart sank as he held Emma tightly, trying to make sense of what she was saying. Mommy went away, he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. Emma nodded, her small face pressed against his chest, but she didn't say anything more. He could feel the fear and confusion radiating from her, and it terrified him. What had happened? Where was Sarah? Why was Emma down here, alone, in the cold basement? He gently pulled back so he could look into Emma's eyes. Sweetie, can you tell me what happened? When did Mommy go away? Emma hesitated, her little hands gripping the fabric of his jacket. I don't know, Daddy. It was a few days ago, I think. Mommy was crying a lot. She said she was sorry. She told me to stay here and be a good girl, and that she would be back soon. But she didn't come back. Daniel's mind raced. Sarah had left Emma alone in the house? That didn't sound like her at all. Sarah was a devoted mother. She would never abandon their daughter. Something must have happened, something serious. Did Mommy say anything else? Did she leave a note? Daniel asked, trying to keep his voice calm even though panic was clawing at him. Emma shook her head. No, she just said she was sorry and that she loved me. Then she left. I waited, like she told me, but it got dark and I got scared. So I came down here. Daniel felt a surge of guilt and fear. He should have been here. He should have been with them, protecting them, but he had been halfway across the world. Now his wife was missing, and his daughter had been left alone, frightened and confused. He scooped Emma up in his arms, feeling her small body relax slightly as he held her close. It's going to be okay, sweetheart. I'm here now. We'll figure this out together. Daniel carried Emma upstairs, trying to think clearly. He needed to find out where Sarah was and what had happened. But first, he needed to take care of Emma. She was exhausted, pale, and clearly hadn't eaten properly in days. He took her to the kitchen and sat her down at the table, trying to keep his own emotions in check. Are you hungry, Emma? Do you want something to eat? Emma nodded, her eyes still filled with uncertainty. Can I have some cereal, Daddy? Of course, sweetheart, Daniel said, forcing a smile. He found a box of cereal in the cupboard and poured it into a bowl, adding some milk. As Emma began to eat, Daniel couldn't help but notice how tired she looked, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. He couldn't imagine what she had been through, waiting alone in the dark, unsure if her mother would ever come back. Once Emma had finished eating, Daniel carried her upstairs to her bedroom. He tucked her into bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. She looked so small and vulnerable lying there, and it broke his heart. Daddy, are you going to find Mommy? Emma asked, her voice small and uncertain. Daniel leaned down and kissed her forehead. Yes, sweetheart. I'm going to find her. But right now, you need to rest. I'm not going anywhere, okay? I'll be right here. Emma nodded, her eyes closing as she snuggled into the blankets. I missed you, Daddy. I missed you too, Emma. More than you know, Daniel whispered, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over. He stayed by her side until she drifted off to sleep, her breathing soft and steady. When he was sure she was asleep, Daniel quietly left the room and headed back downstairs. His mind was spinning with questions and fears, but he knew he needed to stay focused. He had to find Sarah and understand what had driven her to leave like this. He went through the house again, this time more carefully, searching for any clues that might explain what had happened. In the bedroom, he found Sarah's phone on the floor, the screen cracked and unresponsive. There was no note, no message, nothing to indicate where she had gone or why she had left. But as he was searching through the nightstand drawers, he found something. A piece of paper crumpled and stuffed behind a stack of old letters. He smoothed it out and saw that it was a handwritten note, unfinished and smeared with tears. The note was from Sarah. It was clear that she had been struggling with something for a long time. The words were disjointed, as if she had been trying to pour out her heart but couldn't find the right way to express what she was feeling. She wrote about how she felt overwhelmed, how she was haunted by fears that something terrible would happen to Daniel while he was deployed. She mentioned feeling guilty for being so scared all the time, like she was failing as a mother because she couldn't stay strong for Emma. Daniel's hands shook as he read the note. Sarah had been suffering, and he hadn't known. He had tried to be supportive before he left, but he had never realized just how much pressure she had been under. She had been trying to hold everything together for Emma's sake, but it had clearly become too much for her to bear. The last part of the note was incomplete. It ended with the words, "I'm sorry, I just can't," before trailing off into nothing. It was as if Sarah had started writing, but then couldn't bring herself to finish. Daniel stared at the note, his mind reeling. What had she meant? Where had she gone? And why had she felt that leaving was her only option? He knew he needed help. This was too big to handle on his own. Daniel pulled out his phone and called the police, explaining the situation as best as he could. They took his information and promised to send someone over immediately. Next, he called a few friends and family members, hoping that maybe someone had heard from Sarah or seen her recently. But no one had. While he waited for the police to arrive, Daniel sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. He felt a crushing weight on his chest. Fear for Sarah, guilt for not realizing how much she had been struggling, and overwhelming concern for Emma, who had been left alone in such a terrifying situation. When the police arrived, they were compassionate and professional. They took his statement, asked questions, and reassured him that they would do everything they could to find Sarah. They also contacted social services to ensure Emma would be looked after while they searched for her mother. As the night wore on, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He knew Sarah better than anyone, and he knew she wouldn't just leave Emma unless she felt completely trapped and desperate. But what had pushed her to this point? And where had she gone? The police suggested that Daniel get some rest, but sleep was the furthest thing from his mind. He stayed awake, his thoughts racing, trying to piece together what had happened and what he should do next. Emma's safety was his top priority, but he couldn't stop thinking about Sarah and what she might be going through. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows, Daniel made a silent promise to himself. He would find Sarah, no matter what it took. They had been through so much together, and he wasn't going to give up on her now. He just hoped it wasn't too late. As the sun rose, Daniel's exhaustion was palpable, but he couldn't let himself rest. Every minute that passed without knowing where Sarah was felt like a lifetime. He knew he had to act fast, but he also had to stay calm for Emma's sake. She needed him now more than ever. After making sure Emma was still sound asleep, Daniel began reaching out to everyone he could think of. Friends, neighbors, even Sarah's coworkers. He asked if anyone had seen her or spoken to her recently, but no one had any answers. Each call left him feeling more and more hopeless. Just as Daniel was beginning to feel overwhelmed, there was a knock at the door. It was Officer Hernandez, the police officer who had taken his statement the night before. She had brought along a detective, a middle-aged man with a serious expression and a calm demeanor. His name was Detective Williams. "Mr. Mitchell," Detective Williams began, extending his hand. "I'm sorry to meet under these circumstances. We've started looking into Sarah's disappearance, and I want to assure you that we're doing everything we can to find her." "Thank you," Daniel said, shaking the detective's hand. I don't understand. Sarah wouldn't just leave. Something must have happened." Detective Williams nodded. "We're considering all possibilities. I need to ask you some more questions, if that's all right. It might help us narrow down where she could have gone." Daniel agreed, and the three of them sat down in the living room. The detective asked about the days leading up to Sarah's disappearance. Had she seemed different? Had she said anything that might hint at what she was planning? Daniel recounted everything he could remember, but nothing stood out as a clear sign. He mentioned the note he had found, and Detective Williams asked to see it. As the detective read the note, his expression grew more serious. "It sounds like Sarah was under a lot of emotional strain," he said gently. "We'll need to consider the possibility that she left because she felt overwhelmed, but we'll also explore other angles. Sometimes people feel like they're a burden and try to disappear to avoid hurting their loved ones. Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. The idea that Sarah had felt so alone, so desperate, that she would leave like this was almost too much to bear. She was always so strong, Daniel whispered. I should have seen it coming. I should have known. You can't blame yourself, Mr. Mitchell, Officer Hernandez said softly. Mental health struggles aren't always visible, even to those closest to us. What's important now is finding her and getting her the help she needs. Detective Williams asked a few more questions about Sarah's habits, her friends, and any places she might have gone. He also mentioned that they would be checking local hospitals, shelters, and other places where she might have sought help. Daniel appreciated the thoroughness, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. He felt powerless, like he was running out of time. After the police left, Daniel felt a crushing sense of isolation. He knew he couldn't just sit and wait for news. He had to keep searching. He called his brother, Mike, who lived a few hours away. Mike had always been his rock, and he knew he could count on him now. Mike, I need your help, Daniel said, trying to keep his voice steady. Sarah's missing. The police are involved, but I can't just sit here. I need to do something. Mike didn't hesitate. I'm on my way, Danny. We'll find her, I promise. While waiting for Mike to arrive, Daniel busied himself with small tasks around the house, anything to keep his mind occupied. He made breakfast for Emma, trying to act as normal as possible even though his heart was racing with anxiety. Daddy, where's Mommy? Emma asked as she picked at her food. Her eyes were full of innocence, but Daniel could see the worry lurking beneath. She's out right now, sweetheart, but we're going to find her, Daniel said, forcing a reassuring smile. Uncle Mike is coming over to help. Emma nodded, trusting her father's words. But Daniel could see that she was still scared. He wished he could take away her fear, but all he could do was hold her close and keep searching. When Mike arrived, his presence was a comfort. The two brothers had always been close, and Mike's calm, practical nature was exactly what Daniel needed. Together, they made a plan to search the nearby areas, parks, shops, places Sarah liked to visit. Mike also suggested putting up missing person flyers with Sarah's picture, and they quickly got to work printing them out. The day passed in a blur of activity, but with every hour that went by, Daniel's worry deepened. They had covered a lot of ground, talked to countless people, and distributed flyers, but there was still no sign of Sarah. The police had no updates either, which only added to Daniel's frustration. As night fell, Daniel and Mike returned home, exhausted and disheartened. Emma was already asleep, tucked in by Mike's wife, who had come over to help watch her. Daniel was grateful for their support, but he couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to him like a dark cloud. Sitting on the couch, Mike handed Daniel a cup of coffee. We'll keep looking tomorrow, Mike said, his voice steady. Don't lose hope, Danny. We'll find her. Daniel nodded, but he couldn't help feeling like time was slipping away. What if they didn't find her? What if something terrible had happened? The thought made his stomach turn. Just as he was about to respond, Daniel's phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a call from a number he didn't recognize. His heart skipped a beat as he answered it. Hello? Mr. Mitchell? The voice on the other end was calm, but there was an urgency to it. This is Dr. Palmer from St. Mary's Hospital. We have a patient here who was admitted earlier today. She gave us your name as her emergency contact. I believe it's your wife, Sarah. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Is she okay? She's stable, Dr. Palmer replied, but she's been through a lot. I think it would be best if you came to see her as soon as possible. Daniel barely heard the rest of what the doctor said. Relief, fear, and anxiety all crashed over him at once. He quickly told Mike what had happened, and they both rushed to the hospital. When they arrived at St. Mary's, Daniel felt a mixture of emotions. Relief that Sarah had been found, but fear of what he might discover when he saw her. Dr. Palmer met them in the waiting area and explained that Sarah had been admitted after being found in a distressed state. She had been brought in by a good Samaritan who found her wandering near the highway, disoriented and visibly upset. She's physically okay, but emotionally, she's very fragile, Dr. Palmer explained. She's been through a traumatic experience, and it's going to take time for her to recover. Daniel's heart ached as he listened. He wanted to see Sarah, to hold her and tell her everything would be okay. But he knew this wasn't something that could be fixed with just words. He had to be patient, supportive, and ready to help her through whatever she was facing. When Daniel finally saw Sarah, lying in the hospital bed, pale and exhausted, it took all his strength not to break down. She looked so small, so vulnerable, nothing like the strong woman he had always known. Her eyes were red from crying, and she seemed lost in a fog of despair. "Sarah," Daniel whispered, taking her hand gently. "I'm here. I'm so sorry I wasn't there when you needed me." Sarah looked at him, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I just couldn't handle it anymore." "You don't have to apologize," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to go through this alone. We're going to get through this together." As he held her hand, Daniel knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he was determined to be there for her every step of the way. He had faced many battles in his life, but this was the most important one, helping his wife heal and bringing his family back together. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions for Daniel. He stayed by Sarah's side as much as he could, holding her hand, reassuring her, and letting her know she wasn't alone. But the Sarah he saw now was not the same woman he had known before. The light in her eyes was dimmed, replaced by a deep sadness that seemed impossible to penetrate. Sarah barely spoke at first, her voice faint and hesitant. It was clear she was battling something within herself, something that had been festering for a long time. As much as Daniel wanted to know what had driven her to this point, he knew he had to be patient. Pressuring her for answers wouldn't help. She needed time, and she needed to feel safe. Dr. Palmer arranged for Sarah to meet with a therapist, someone who specialized in trauma and mental health. Daniel hoped that talking to a professional would help Sarah open up, but he couldn't help feeling anxious. He wanted to understand what had happened, to know how to help her, but he feared what he might learn. After a few days, Sarah began to speak more openly, but only in small fragments. She would mention a feeling of suffocation, of being overwhelmed by everything, parenting, the constant fear for Daniel's safety while he was deployed, the loneliness that gnawed at her every day. She spoke about the pressure to be strong, to keep everything together for Emma's sake, but how that pressure eventually became too much to bear. "It felt like I was drowning, Daniel," Sarah said quietly one evening as they sat together in her hospital room. "Every day, I woke up with this weight on my chest, like I couldn't breathe. I tried to hide it, to push through, but it kept getting worse. I was so scared of losing you, of Emma losing you, and I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't want to burden you with my fears, so I kept them inside. But they grew and grew, until I felt like I was suffocating." Daniel listened, his heart breaking with every word. He had no idea she had been carrying such a heavy burden. He had always seen Sarah as strong, resilient, capable of handling anything that came her way. But he realized now that his perception had been clouded by his own expectations. He hadn't seen the signs, hadn't understood how much she was struggling. "Why didn't you tell me, Sarah?" Daniel asked gently, squeezing her hand. "I would have helped you. We could have faced this together." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't want to add to your worries. You had enough on your plate, being out there, in danger every day. I felt like I had to be the strong one here, for you and for Emma. But inside, I was falling apart. And then, when you left on that last deployment, something in me just broke. I felt so alone, so scared all the time. I started having these panic attacks, but I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want to seem weak." Her voice trembled as she continued. "I tried to hold it together, for Emma, but then one day, I just couldn't. I felt like I was failing her, failing you. I didn't want her to see me like that, so I told her to stay in the basement. I thought I could come back when I had pulled myself together, but instead, I just, I left. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get away. I thought, I thought maybe you and Emma would be better off without me. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. Sarah, you're not a burden. You're my wife, and I love you. We're a team. I'm sorry I didn't see what you were going through. I should have been there for you. I didn't want you to see me like this, Sarah whispered. I didn't want you to know how scared I was, how lost I felt, but I was wrong. I needed help, and I didn't ask for it. Daniel's heart ached as he realized the depth of Sarah's pain. She had been struggling in silence, trying to protect him from her fears, but in doing so, she had isolated herself. He wished he could go back in time and change things, but all he could do now was be there for her, fully and completely. You're not alone anymore, Sarah, Daniel said softly. We'll get through this together, I promise. You don't have to carry this weight by yourself. Sarah nodded, but Daniel could see that the road ahead would be long and difficult. She was battling more than just the events of the past few weeks. She was battling years of internalized fear and anxiety, and it wouldn't be easy to overcome. But Daniel was determined to stand by her side, no matter how hard it got. Over the next few weeks, Sarah's therapist helped her unpack the emotions and experiences that had led her to this point. She talked about the overwhelming sense of responsibility she felt, how she had internalized the idea that she had to be perfect, that she couldn't show weakness or vulnerability. The constant worry for Daniel's safety had only intensified these feelings, and she had begun to spiral into a deep depression, one she had hidden from everyone, even herself. As Sarah began to understand her own struggles better, she started to slowly rebuild her sense of self. She learned that it was okay to ask for help, that she didn't have to carry everything on her own shoulders. It was a painful process, full of setbacks and difficult emotions, but she was no longer facing it alone. Daniel was there for her every step of the way, and so was Emma. The little girl didn't fully understand what had happened, but she knew that her mommy was getting better, and that made her happy. Slowly, the darkness that had engulfed their family began to lift, replaced by a newfound sense of hope and healing. There were still difficult days ahead, but Daniel knew that they would get through them together. Sarah wasn't alone, and neither was he. They had each other, and that was enough. In the end, the experience brought them closer than ever before. It taught them the importance of communication, of being open about their fears and vulnerabilities. They learned that strength didn't mean facing everything alone. It meant leaning on each other, trusting each other, and knowing that it was okay to not be okay. For Daniel, the ordeal was a painful reminder of the price of silence, of the dangers of letting fear and anxiety fester in the shadows. But it was also a reminder of the power of love, and how it could light the way even in the darkest of times. As Sarah continued her therapy, the healing process was slow but steady. She still had moments of doubt and fear, but with each passing day, she grew a little stronger. The therapist helped her develop strategies to manage her anxiety and depression, and Sarah began to open up more to Daniel about her thoughts and feelings. The walls she had built around herself were slowly coming down, brick by brick. At home, life was beginning to return to a new kind of normal. Daniel took on more of the household responsibilities, allowing Sarah the space she needed to focus on her recovery. He spent more time with Emma, making sure she felt safe and loved. Emma, in her innocent way, sensed the changes in her parents and responded with a quiet resilience. She would often crawl into bed with them at night, snuggling between them, as if to hold the family together with her tiny presence. One evening, about a month after Sarah had come home from the hospital, Daniel and Sarah were sitting on the couch after putting Emma to bed. The house was quiet, and for the first time in a long while, the silence didn't feel heavy or oppressive. It felt peaceful. "Do you remember when we first moved into this house?" Sarah asked, her voice soft. Daniel smiled. "How could I forget? You insisted on painting the entire living room yellow because you said it would make the space feel warm and welcoming." Sarah chuckled, a lightness in her voice that Daniel hadn't heard in a long time. And you were so sure it was too bright, but you went along with it anyway. I thought it looked like a sunflower exploded in here, Daniel said with a laugh. But it grew on me. And you were right. It did make the place feel like home. Sarah's smile faded a little as she looked down at her hands. I miss feeling that way, Daniel. Like everything was simple. Like we were just happy. Daniel reached over and took her hand in his. We can get that back, Sarah. It won't be exactly the same, but we can find a new kind of happiness. We're still us. We're still a family. Sarah looked up at him, her eyes filled with both hope and uncertainty. Do you really believe that? I do, Daniel said firmly. We've been through a lot, but we're still standing. And as long as we keep moving forward together, I know we'll be okay. Sarah squeezed his hand. I want to believe that too. I'm trying. That's all I can ask for, Daniel said gently, one step at a time. As the weeks turned into months, Daniel and Sarah focused on rebuilding their lives together. They made an effort to communicate more openly, sharing their worries, fears, and hopes with each other. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments of tension, of misunderstandings, but they were committed to working through them. They also began attending couples therapy, which helped them address the deeper issues that had contributed to Sarah's breakdown. Through these sessions, they learned how to support each other better, how to recognize when one of them was struggling, and how to lean on each other in healthy ways. It was a journey of growth for both of them, and it brought them closer together than they had been in years. Emma, too, was thriving. With both of her parents more present and attentive, she blossomed. She loved having her daddy home, and she adored the time she spent with her mommy, whether they were baking cookies, reading stories, or just cuddling on the couch. The little family was finding its way back to a place of love and connection. As they continued to heal, Daniel and Sarah decided to take a small vacation. A weekend getaway to a cabin by a lake. It was a chance to reconnect, to leave behind the stress and worries of their everyday lives, and to focus on each other. The cabin was nestled in a quiet, wooded area, with a clear view of the sparkling lake. The air was crisp and fresh, and the sound of the water lapping against the shore was soothing. It was exactly what they needed. A break from everything, a chance to just be together. On the second evening of their trip, after Emma had gone to bed, Daniel and Sarah sat by the fireplace, wrapped in a cozy blanket. The flames crackled softly, casting a warm glow across the room. Thank you for bringing us here, Sarah said, leaning her head on Daniel's shoulder. It feels good to get away, to just breathe. I thought it would be good for us, Daniel replied, kissing the top of her head. We've been through so much, and we deserve some peace. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the fire and the distant sounds of the lake. Then Sarah spoke, her voice thoughtful. I've been thinking a lot about the future, about what I want it to look like. What do you see? Daniel asked, curious. I see us, Sarah said, smiling softly. I see us growing stronger, building a life that's filled with love and understanding. I see us supporting each other, even on the hard days. And I see us teaching Emma that it's okay to ask for help, that it's okay to not be perfect. Daniel nodded, feeling a deep sense of contentment. I see that too, and I'm ready to do whatever it takes to make that future a reality. Sarah turned to look at him, her eyes shining with emotion. I love you, Daniel. I don't think I've said that enough lately. I love you too, Sarah, Daniel replied, his voice thick with emotion. More than anything. They kissed, a tender and heartfelt moment that spoke of their shared commitment to moving forward, to healing, to loving each other through it all. As they held each other close, the fire crackling softly beside them, Daniel knew that they had made it through the storm. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but they were facing it together, hand in hand, heart to heart. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt a sense of peace. They had come so far, and they had done it together. No matter what the future held, he knew they would be okay.